Okay, hey everybody. So this is the first lecture for the first week, and what we're going to be covering is arguments. All right, so we're going to talk about what arguments are, what they're made of, and how to recognize them and how to take them apart. Okay, arguments are going to be a really important structure that we're going to look at, right? Because arguments are the form that most writing takes when it's trying to provide reasons for a claim. Okay, and critical thinking is really about assessing whether or not we ought to believe one claim or another. Okay, so arguments are going to be kind of the meat and potatoes of this course, understanding what they are. So why don't we just start there with what arguments are. Okay, so what is an argument? You've probably heard this word before, and you might think that an argument is a fight that two people have with each other about the truth or falsity of something, right? Like maybe you have an argument with your friend about what to eat for lunch. They want to eat pizza and you want to eat lasagna or something. I don't know. But that's not what we're going to be using the word to mean in this class, okay? Arguments in critical thinking and in philosophy more generally, and just in writing more generally, means something a little bit more specific. So here's the sort of technical definition of an argument. A group of statements, one or more of which are claimed to provide support for or reasons to believe one of the others, right? So you'll already notice here that we've got two important words in our definition, right? First, the premises, or the premises, sorry. These are statements which provide support for another statement, the conclusion, all right? So notice that an argument is a group of statements, in other words, more than one statement, and some of them are going to provide support for one of them, all right? So an argument is not just a fight that two people might have with one another. Rather, an argument is a structure of writing in which some statements support another, okay? A good argument is going to be one where the statements actually do provide good support for the conclusion, okay? So in an argument, either premises really do support the conclusion or they don't. Arguments where premises really do support the conclusion, that's a good argument. Arguments where the premises don't support the conclusion, that's a bad argument, okay? And so critical thinking, at least this part of it, is going to be about figuring out what's a good argument and what's a bad argument. In other words, when do the premises actually support the conclusion versus when the premises don't actually provide support for the conclusion, okay? So that's what we're working on here. The purpose of logic, that's the practice of critical thinking that we're developing this week and next week and the week after. The purpose of logic is to develop methods and techniques to distinguish good arguments from bad ones, okay? So let's talk about the components of an argument, all right? An argument is a group of statements, right? So an argument is made out of statements. Well, what's a statement, okay? So statements are typically declarative sentences that are either true or false, okay? So notice, a statement can be true or false, not an argument. An argument can't be true or false. A statement can be true or false, okay? So what's a statement, right? Well, truth and falsity, sorry. Those are the two possible truth values of a statement, right? But what's a statement then? It's a sentence or it's a claim, and it can be true or false. Notice, though, not all. Oh, sorry. Well, here's some examples of statements, right? Vanilla ice is loaded with calories. That's a true statement, okay? Political candidates always tell the complete truth. That is a false statement, right? At least some political candidates lie sometimes or don't tell the complete truth sometimes. So it's false that they always do, right? Trout plays baseball and James plays basketball. That's true. Those are sports guys. You know, sports guys. Tiger Woods plays golf and Michael Jordan drives NASCAR. What about this one? Is this one true or false? What do you think? It's false, right? Okay. You can't have a half truth in a statement. A statement is either true or false, okay? So yes, Tiger Woods plays golf, but Michael Jordan plays basketball, not drive NASCAR. So the whole darn thing is false. Okay? So these are statements, right? They're sentences that can be true or false. That's another way to put it. Now, not all sentences are statements. Some sentences do not have a truth value. That is, they might not be true or false, okay? So, for instance, where is Paris? That is a question. It's in France, right? Paris is in France. That's a statement that could be true or false. Where is Paris? Not a statement. It's a question. It can't be true or false, right? Let's go to a movie tonight. That's a proposal. It can't be true or false, right? We went to a movie last night. That could be true or false. That's a statement. But let's go to the movies? Not a statement. It's a proposal. Can't be true or false. Likewise, I suggest you do not miss any class. This is a suggestion. Can't be true or false. Same kind of thing, right? Put away your cell phones. That's a command. It can't be true or false, right? I'm just telling you to do something. So it's not necessarily a statement. Fantastic! Exclamation, right? Like you get very excited about something, you're just, hey, that can't be true or false. It's just an exclamation. Okay, so just to review real quickly here, right? Not all sentences are statements, only sentences that can be true or false, that have one of these guys, a truth value. Okay, that's what a statement is, and an argument is made out of statements. Okay, so an argument isn't made out of questions or proposals or suggestions or commands or exclamations. Okay, so premises and conclusions, those are the two different kinds of statements in an argument, right? So premises are statements that provide reasons or evidence for another statement, okay? And a conclusion is the statement that reasons and evidences support or imply, right? So in other words, the premises support or imply the conclusion. If it's true that my premises are true, then it's likely or definitely necessary that the conclusion is also true, okay? So here's an example. Here's a premise. All movie stars are celebrities. Michael B. Jordan is a movie star. Therefore, Michael B. Jordan is a celebrity. See, makes sense, right? Because if it's true that all movie stars are celebrities, and it's true that Michael B. Jordan is a movie star, then it kind of has to be true that Michael B. Jordan is a celebrity, right? So this is a very basic syllogism or argument. It's a very basic argument. It's got two premises, and if these two premises are true, then this one is going to have to be true. Does that make sense? I hope so. Okay, so what's a conclusion? It's very important to make sure that you distinguish your conclusions from your premises, okay? So there are some little tricks to help you do that, right? Many arguments contain what we call conclusion indicators, right? These provide us with clues to help us separate premises from conclusions, okay? So these are some words you want to look for when you're trying to figure out what the conclusion of an argument might be. Therefore, accordingly, entails that. Wherefore, we may conclude. Hence, thus, it must be that. It follows that. Consequently, for this reason, implies that. Okay, so these kinds of things, these are all conclusion indicators. There's some more in your textbook that you might want to take a look at. But here's some more. We may infer, so, as a result. Okay, so like it's a good idea to just sort of like get familiar with these, study them, memorize them, whatever. But keep an eye out for those, okay? Because generally when you see one of those, you know, the conclusion of the argument's coming up, okay? So I know that this all sounds super basic, but trust me, once you get to analyzing slightly more complex arguments, it gets a little tricky, okay? But so we're just moving through the basics right now, so just make sure you're following, okay? So here's the example. Tortured prisoners will say anything to relieve their pain. Consequently, torture is not a reliable method of interrogation. Well, first of all, is this an argument? Well, is it made out of statements? How many statements we got? Tortured prisoners will say anything to relieve their pain. Could that be true or false? Let me switch to a little pen here. What do you think? Could this be true or false? Well, yes, it could be, right? Either it's going to be true or it's going to be false that tortured prisoners will say anything to relieve their pain, right? It's not a question, it's not a command, it's not a, you know, whatever, suggestion, right? And then we've got torture is not a reliable method of interrogation, right? That could also be true or false, right? It might be true that torture is not a reliable method of interrogation. It might also be true that it works perfectly well, right? Notice here, we've got this handy little dude, consequently, right? So that's telling us that this statement is probably the conclusion and that this statement, right, is providing support. And so like that just makes sense, right? I think it does anyway, right? Tortured prisoners will say anything to relieve their pain. That's a reason that torture is not a reliable method of interrogation, right? Just think about it. Someone who's going to say anything to get out of that situation, they'll lie, right? So torture is not a reliable method of interrogation, right? Example 2. It must be true that torture is not a reliable method. Tortured prisoners will say anything to relieve their pain. Okay, so notice now the statements are in a different order, right? This time this one comes first, but we've got this guy here, which is your conclusion indicator, right? So it's the same argument, it's just put in a different order, right? And you can, so it's not that this is the second statement that tells us it's the conclusion. It's not that it comes at the end, right? It's this consequently here. And in this example, it's the it must be that, right? So that's the conclusion indicator there. And then finally, torture is not a reliable method given that tortured prisoners will say anything to relieve their pain. Okay, notice we do not have a conclusion indicator here, but we've got this little guy given that, right? And guess what that is, friends? It's a premise indicator, okay? So some arguments might not have conclusion indicators, but they're gonna have premise indicators, right? So keep an eye out for those as well. Here's some typical premise indicators. Since, in that, seeing that, as indicated by, may be inferred from, for that reason, because, as, inasmuch as, for, given, owing to. Okay, so these are some common ones that you might want to just remember. Okay, notice, you know, for this reason is a conclusion indicator, but for the reason that is a premise indicator, right? So those are close. So just make sure you don't mix those two up, and we'll see why in a minute. It's easier to see all this stuff in context, but I just, you know, here's a list. If you need to study something, study this list. There's more in the textbook as well. All right. So a single premise indicator may identify more than one premise. So let's take a look. It is vitally important that wilderness areas be preserved. For wilderness provides essential habitat for wildlife, including endangered species, and it is a natural retreat from the stress of daily life. Great. Okay. So where's the premise indicator? Do you see any, first of all, do you see any conclusion indicators? No. Do you see any premise indicators? How about this little guy, right? You know, if we go back, there it is. Yeah, okay, so 4 is a kind of, there she is. 4 is an indicator of a premise, that a premise is coming up next, right? But notice here, we've got these commas, and I've got this and here, right? So we've got several statements that follow. Right? So we've got multiple indicators, or multiple premises coming after that indicator, okay? So what's the conclusion then? Well, this is the conclusion. It's vitally important that wilderness areas be preserved, right? That's what the person who wrote the argument is trying to get you to believe. And then these are your premises, okay? I'll say a little bit about this more in the next lecture, but just notice, right, when you've got commas, that usually means there's more than one statement, right? Because there's more than one thing here that could be true or false, right? So keep that in mind, right? So you've got 3 premises and 1 conclusion. So here's the form of the argument. Premise 1, wilderness provides essential habitat for wildlife. It is a natural retreat, premise 2, from the stress of daily life. Therefore, Conclusion, it is vitally important that wilderness areas be preserved, including dangerous species. I guess that's going to go here. I think you could split that up as well. But anyway, this is fine. So there's two premises and a conclusion. Right. Sometimes you get one with no indicators, and that's kind of annoying. In these cases, it's kind of helpful to ask, what is the single statement that is claimed to follow from the others, right? Like in other words, what's the arguer trying to show me? What's the main point of this passage? What are they trying to get us to believe? So here's an example. Research into genetic diseases deserves increased funding. Not only will it pay for itself in terms of pharmaceutical spin-offs, but it will help the lives of millions of suffering. At current levels of funding, research cannot achieve desired goals, right? So what do you think the main idea here is? Right? What's the author trying to get you to believe, right? One thing to try is to put the word, put a conclusion indicator in there, right? And sort of say, like, where would the conclusion indicator go, right? What do you think? Research into genetic diseases deserves increased funding. Not only will it pay for itself in terms of pharmaceutical spin-offs, it will help the lives of millions of suffering. At current levels of funding, research cannot achieve desired goals. Is this the thing they're trying to show us? Oh, sorry. Is this what they're trying to show us? Right? At current levels of funding? Or are they trying to show us that this is what we need to do, right? It seems like current levels of funding, research cannot achieve desired goals. That could be a reason, right, to increase funding, right? Likewise, not only will it pay for itself in terms of pharmaceutical spin-offs, but it will help the lives of millions of suffering, right? Those seem like reasons to increase funding, right? Whereas it deserving increased funding doesn't seem like a reason to believe that it will pay for itself, right? Does that make sense? So you can always try to sort of like take one premise and kind of like use it and see if it works, right? So not only will it, right, research into genetic diseases deserves increased funding, therefore, not only will it pay for itself in terms of pharmaceutical spin-off, that doesn't make sense, right? But not only will it pay for itself in terms of pharmaceutical spin-offs, but it will help the lives of millions suffering. Therefore, research into genetic diseases deserves increased funding. That kind of works, and that kind of makes sense. So you can always try to sort of fit a conclusion indicator in there. Okay. The other thing is often the first statement is the conclusion, right? That's definitely the case here. So, always start there. And then when restructuring the argument, it's important to remain as close as possible as the original. However, we'll get into this in the next lecture. This is less important. But when you're sort of breaking it apart, you want to make sure that you stick as close as possible to the meaningful sentence. Okay? Last thing, some statements in a passage are not part of the argument. Okay, so sometimes you're reading something and it's got stuff in there that doesn't necessarily have to do with an argument. Right, so here's a thing, right? Your answers shouldn't be vague. After all, I need to know how you're answering each question. And what do I mean when I say your answers shouldn't be vague? Well, for example, if I ask you whether or not a passage is a conclusion, it might be is a vague answer. Okay, so what's definitely not part of the argument? Well, anything without a truth value, right? And what do we got here? Oh. Is that a statement? No, it's a question, right? It doesn't have a truth value. So that's not part of the argument, right? So what is part of the argument, right? Which of these statements is neither a premise or conclusion? Well, it's the question, right? And everything that comes after the question, right? This is now an answer to this question, right? It is a statement that could be true or false, but it seems to have left behind any kind of argument that was already going on before, right? So what's the conclusion? Conclusion, the only argument, there's only one little argument in this passage. It's quite short. It's got two statements. Your answer shouldn't be vague as the conclusion, and I need to know how you're answering each question is the premise, right? I need to know how you're answering each question, therefore your answer shouldn't be vague. Okay, so summing up, argument. is a group of statements, one or more of which are claimed to provide support for or reasons to believe one of the others, right? And that's the premises and the conclusion. Premises is statements that provide reason or evidence, and a conclusion is a statement that reasons or evidences support, okay? And then the other main thing that we talked about in this little lecture was that you should look for common premise and conclusion indicators. There's a list here in the PowerPoints, and you'll find if you look in your textbook, there's a list there, okay? So I hope this thing has been helpful. Study the book, look at this again. Let me know if you got any questions or problems. All right. This has been lovely. You know where to find me. Bye-bye.